In this video, we're going to jump in and create a brand new page using the page that we already have open, the index.html, inside of week 4 using Dreamweaver. So this time I'm going to keep my window mostly on design. I'll look at the code occasionally, if at all, but I'd like to guide you through the process of creating a website using exclusively drag and drop, and what you see is what you get. Now, this doesn't mean that we're building the whole website this way. I'm just going to build one page. This is the page you're going to be using for the poem assignment, the hyperpoem. And basically what's going to happen is that we're going to build a structure that's going to hold our web page. What do I mean by structure? Maybe from Web 1 you remember that you used your semantic tags to bring to life your page. And by that I mean is that at some point maybe we used lots of div, the division tags, and then we switched on to headers and articles and sections and things like that. I did post an example of what I'm talking about on just before this assignment. This is a basic HTML layout using semantic elements. Like I just mentioned, there's a header, there's navigation, there's section, article, asides, and footers. Doesn't mean that every page is going to look like this, because sometimes navigation is on the side, sometimes navigation is at the bottom, sometimes navigation is non-existent. In the page that we'll be creating with the hyperpoem, there will not be a navigation. There will not be any particular articles. However, there will be a main tag, something that's not included in the HTML5 image supplied by W3 Schools. Instead, that we'll be using a main, which is included in Dreamweaver. The main basically is just like another section that can have sections inside, it can have articles inside, it can have asides, it can have just about anything. Any one of these tags, just because they're semantic, just means that that's what they're called, and hopefully if you like your coworkers that are doing the coding with you, then you tell them, I'm going to call header header, I'm going to call the navigation nav. However, if you change them and you use a nav tag for a header and you're the only one that knows it, as long as you're the only one that's making changes, it won't make any difference to the computer. The system will always be telling you that your headers, your navs, etc. are correct as long as they're placed in the right order. That being said, I'm coming back to my website, and I've jumped to another computer, so I need to make a quick change. I need to bring in my insert back so that I can see it on top. I have my properties, I have my CSS Designer and my file, and my DOM file. I'm just going to close that tab group. Okay. Now that I have my insert on top, and whether it's on top or on the side, that's going to be up to you. I'm going to start to drop in some things. I'm going to look at the top of the page and look inside my HTML insert tags. In the second section, there's going to be a header, navigation, main, aside, article, section, and footer, just like we just talked about in the illustration in the previous page. Something like this. So we have header, nav, etc. For this particular exercise, we're only going to have a header, we're going to have a main section, and then we're going to have a footer. If you want to use a section instead of main, that's fine for this particular exercise. However, because we're just jumping into Dreamweaver and there is a main tag available, something that maybe some other editors are missing, we'll be using a main. So this being blank and our poem still being somewhere else, that we'll bring it back later, we're going to build the structure first. So let's start by bringing in a header. Clicking just once will give me an insert header argument. It says, where do you want to insert this? It's at the insertion point. Currently the insertion point is anywhere where the cursor is blinking. I'll go back to that. And so that's fine because it's the very first element that we have. I'm not going to assign it a class. I'm going to give it an ID instead. And you'll notice in this class that I'm going to be using the same IDs mostly for my layouts, just because I've grown used to them. I'm going to call this one page header. I'm using camel case. So it's all one word, very important, just one word, no spaces, because Dreamweaver HTML5 in general does not like spaces inside the name of things like IDs and classes, files and directories. So I'm just calling it page header with a capital H. I'm not going to generate any CSS rules just yet, so I'm going to click OK. I get the first of what I call pancakes on Dreamweaver. There's the page header. Content for ID page header goes here, placer. Meanwhile, in the code, we see that the body now has a header inside, and it's got an ID of page header. Be paying attention to the tag selector at the bottom. Now that we have our text and our cursor blinking inside of the page header text, you'll see that Dreamweaver is telling you that you are in the body where there is a header with a title, or rather an ID of page header. So just by clicking here, you're telling Dreamweaver, or rather Dreamweaver is telling you where you are. Following, we're going to have a main tag. Main is going to be after the navigation. This is the main right here. I'll click on main. Where do I want to insert? Well, I've been clicking around this page for a while, so I'm not sure where the cursor is. I could go back and pinpoint it exactly where I want it, but just to be safe, I'm going to tell Dreamweaver that instead of just inserting at the insertion point, wherever that may be, that I'm going to insert it after a tag. That tag being the one tag that I have, which is this page header tag, and it tells me what it's got. It's got an a header ID page header. I'll accept that. The new ID for the main will be page main, also in camel case. I'll click OK, and my second pancake appears. Third, for this thing, since I only want a header, I want the main, and I want the footer, I'm lacking a footer. I'm going to click on the icon that says footer. I could insert after the tag like I did with the page main. It'll tell me, well, now you have two tags. You have a page header tag, you have a page main tag. This one would be after the page main. However, because this is a footer and the footer is usually at the very bottom of the page, I'm going to insert it before the end of a tag, and it will make the assumption that I want it before the body ends. So the body covers the whole HTML page, so just before it ends, it's going to add a footer. This ID will be, you guessed it, page footer. I'll click OK again. And now my initial pancakes are ready. I'm going to also give this page a little bit of styling. Currently, it doesn't say much. I'll look at the code. The content for ID page header is there for your convenience so that you can see where in the stack your pancakes are. Content for ID page main, page footer are there, and they're all titled accordingly: header, main, and footer tags. I'll go back to my design, and I'll be inputting some of the text in a little bit, but first I want to make sure that I have a cascading style sheet. This is a CSS file, and that it's set to my initial settings. So I'm going to click then on my CSS Designer. That's over here next to the files if you're still in the beginner workspace. My sources currently are blank. I'm going to modify this just a little bit because I want to see more sources. I'm going to bring back my media. I don't need to see my media. I do have a need for selectors and properties when they come up. So what do all these things mean? CSS Designer, first of all, this is what's going to be reading your style sheets. This is what's going to be reading your CSS styles, whether they're embedded in the page or they are put in a separate page. I prefer to use a separate page, and you may remember this from Web 1 that you always had separate directories where you had separate files and styling sheets. I'm going to create a new style sheet for this particular page while I'm in the page. Currently, index.html is open. I see a little asterisk next to the name because I haven't saved the file, but I will in just a second. But first I'm going to click on the plus next to sources and add a CSS source. It's going to tell me, what do you want to do? Do you want to create a new CSS file, which would create a .css file? Do you want to attach an existing CSS file? That is, if you're working on a larger project that already has CSS defined, you might click on that. And then there's define in page, and that's just the styling that's going to be added to the page itself. Only that page will be affected by the styling. I may want to use this somewhere else later, so I'm going to create a new CSS file. And as I can type in the name, which is going to be styles.css right away, but I'm not really sure that I trust Dreamweaver so much as to just let it decide where it's going to place the file. So I'm going to click on browse. I think it's a good practice to just always browse for your files, and as I feared, it's not pointing inside the week 4, which is where this file actually resides. It's at the web 2 or the root level. Going to click on week 4, double click rather. I'm going to be inside of there. I'm going to create a new file with the file name styles. It already tells me that it's going to save it as a style sheet file, so it already added styles.css to the whole name. I'll click on save, and because I have determined where it's going to be stored, I can just click OK right after that. You'll see that a styles.css name and label has appeared. So our source code, which is everything that makes up the page, is now accompanied by an attached file called styles.css. This is a file that is also going to be found in your files folder or your files panel. I see now that I have a styles.css. It's at 0K just because it's got no information. And if I were to click on the styles, then, which I just did, I'm going to click on just code, and it'll show me these are the styles so far. So far, it's only determined that the character set is going to be universal region 8, so I don't need to worry about that. Everything else, all the selectors, will be added to the rest of this file, which is attached now to the original source code to index.html. I'm going to go back to the design. I have my pancakes, and I'm going to type a couple of things. Well, first of all, this is going to be the road not taken. That's going to be my header or heading inside the header. I'm going to replace that with the title, the road less taken, or rather this is the road not taken, sorry. I'm going to skip by the content for the main for now, because that'll include me bringing in the whole text of the poem. I do know that for the footer though, I'm going to type in the year and my name. And if you're thinking, well, you want to copyright this, I really can't copyright the poem, but I can copyright the page. It's one of those gray areas. I'm not making any money out of this, so I will put a copyright sign in there somewhere. And in Web 1, they told you, what all the codes to all the special characters were. And Dreamweaver, I'm going to go back to the beginning of 2015. Dreamweaver already has this information ready for you. I'm going to click on Insert menu, not this particular insert menu, which may or may not have the copyright. I haven't looked for it there. But I know that if I go to the application menu, Insert, I can find HTML. And after HTML, and I know you can't see it on the screen, at the very bottom there is a character section that pops up, and then I'll be able to find copyright. I'll click on copyright, and the C with the circle appears. It also added the appropriate &copy semicolon tag to the rest of the code. I'll go back to design, and although this looks very much like Word, Microsoft Word, I can't find a center option if I just want to have this text centered. And just like you did before, what needs to happen is that you have to create a cascading style sheet element that's going to center your copyright, that's going to center your title, that's going to center anything else that you want. So let's begin styling in the CSS Designer. In all sources, you should be able to see styles.css. That's the file that I just created. And selectors, there are none because this is a blank file. So far, styles.css only has the character set. I'll go back to just design, and I'll start with the header. First of all, this is just all text. It's just text without any text. There are not any paragraph tags to begin with, much less a heading 1, which is what I want. So I'm going to highlight the text called the road not taken. That's going to be the title. It's going to be a heading 1. And once it's selected, I'm going to change the format from none to heading 1. And it gives me an H1 in the code. Here's H1, the road not taken. Also, you'll see that as long as this is highlighted or the cursor is inside, that my selector, or rather my tag selector, says that I'm in the body where there's a header with a page header ID, and there's an H1 which I've now highlighted. I'm going to make sure that the rest of the stuff here, like the content for ID, actually has some sort of format. It's going to be a paragraph. And then my copyright line at the bottom also has a paragraph. Still not able to center, and that's because I still don't have any true selectors. Before I make a selector for all the content inside of this page, let's pay a little bit of attention to the very first tag. That's the body element tag. While you can't really go around and mess too much with the body, you do have enough leeway that you can make changes. I won't be using too many container tags, for example, just container divisions that held everything in place. I think that the body is already there and we should use it. So I'm going to add to my first selector. I'll click on plus. It's telling me if I want to add a page footer P. That's because that's where I am. Instead, I'm going to start typing the word body, and it tells me that my options are either body or T-body. I'll click on body and press enter. Next, the properties appear just below that. They were always there, and now I can see them. However, I don't see all the properties because it's making assumptions that maybe this is not a new page. But since it is, and I have not defined any properties just yet, there's nothing for it to show me as a set. And that's what it's trying to do right now. It's trying to show me only the set properties. I'm going to unclick, or rather deselect that. And as soon as I do that, I see all my other properties. And this, although this is the properties channel, or rather the properties panel of the selectors that we're putting in. Don't think of it as multiple windows. Think of it as this one tall, long window with a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not really a lot. This is just enough to get us started really with CSS. I'll go back to the top. And the reason why I said don't think about this as separate panels is because there are some shortcuts. First of all, we can go to the layout. I'll click and it stays at the top. I'll click on text, and then I see the properties that go with the text properties. Border, the background, and then more. More used to have additional information that you could change. That's changed since Adobe Dreamweaver CC 2015 came out. So I'll go back to the layout, and I'll just leave it there for a little bit. Let's see what needs to happen now that the body has been given a selector. I want to constrain the size of the body to 960 pixels across. Later, we're going to be creating pages that are responsive, so it doesn't matter how wide they are. We'll be able to say, well, I want to make this page for an iPhone, for example, and then we could look at it on the screen by changing the size to pick an iPhone. I have an iPhone 6 myself, so this would show me this is what this page would look like on an iPhone 6. Not very exciting. We'll work on that later. I'm going to take this back to full size, and while I'm still in layout, I'm going to change the width of the body. Currently, it's got no settings, and I know it's got no settings because styles.css is blank. It's added the body selector, but there are no properties attached to it. Going back to source code and design, I'm going to still be in my body, and I'm going to hover on top of the property that goes with width, and you'll see in gray that it says auto. It doesn't mean that it's already set as auto. It just means that that would be the default if you allowed it to be the default. I don't want it to be the default. I want it to be 960 pixels wide. You'll hear me use that width a lot, 960. That used to be a standard. Now everything's responsive, so we really won't be too concerned with the width after the 6th or 7th week. In the meantime, though, I do want to make sure that I'm measuring this in pixels and that I give it 960 pixels. I'm just typing in 960 after selecting pixels. I'll press enter. There's not enough space on my screen for you to see what's going on, so let me give a quick preview of this. And by that I mean that I can click on this preview debug in browser icon. It's just a little globe, and it says, well, what do you want to do? You want to preview in Google Chrome, or do you want to preview in Internet? Do you want to preview in Google Chrome, or do you want to preview in Internet Explorer? I'll go for Chrome. I'll save changes to index just so that it knows what's going on. Some files needed to accurately preview this page have been modified but not saved. That's the styles.css. That's why it's got the asterisk. It's good. It's a good idea to save it. So I'll say yes, and then it loads it up from my local folder. The road not taken has been put in, and it tells me that maybe it's, you know, a certain width. I can right click and take a look at the page source, and I see my page and parts of my styles. Although I really don't have a chance to check it just by looking at it. All I know is that the page is being constructed so far. I'll go back to Dreamweaver. And something that I can do at this point then is to change the margins. Still in the layout properties, just below all the original width and height, there is a margin setup. And all I gotta do is click on PX on the left, so that instead of adding a definite measure, I'm going to say to just auto select the left width of the margin, or rather the width of the left margin, and do the same thing for the right. I'm going to click on auto. So now I have auto on the left and auto on the right. And let's try that again. Let's go to preview in Google Chrome and open up a copy of this. And now I see that there's a little bit of space to the left, and I'm sure that there's a little bit of space to the right. This page is now centered inside of the layout. The original hyperpoem is still there. I'll close that, and eventually I'll close that one as well. I'll go back to Dreamweaver. I'll put in some additional tags. My H1, the road not taking, up here, I'll click inside somewhere, just inside of road. And in my styles.css, or rather below that in my selectors, I'll add a new selector. Dreamweaver assumes that I want to make a new selector for page header H1, and it is correct. I'll press return. And I'm going to go to the text properties. I'll click on the big T below properties. And what can I do here? Well, I can do multiple things. I can change the color of the text. If this is going to be the road less taken, maybe I want, I don't know, some sort of a brown. I can find my palette and move around until I see some sort of brownish, and then click inside the saturation and brightness panel and pick a brown. It tells me that I actually have selected a hexadecimal color. It's going to be EDA021, and I'll just press enter to accept that. It's now added the color, the hexadecimal number, to the color palette. I can come back and change this at any time. If I already know the color, the hexadecimal color, I can just simply click there and replace that one. I'll leave this one as it is. I see that below that I can also apply a text align property, and I'm going to center it. Then this puts everything to the center. I'm going to go to the next tag that I want to change, and that's going to be inside of the main. The main, by the way, this is already inheriting the width of the body, so everything's at 960 pixels. Going to click on layout and just see what it's got. It doesn't really tell me anything. Like I said, it's just inheriting everything from from the original body tag. So I'm not going, since I don't have any content yet, I'm not going to mess too much with it. I will, however, go to my copyright, highlight that text, or at least just put it inside there somewhere. Make sure that I'm styles.css, and I'm going to add a new selector. New selector is going to be page footer P. I'll press enter to accept. I'm going to go to the text properties and next select something else other than this. I'm going to center it, and it's at the center. I'm going to click on text, and well, I am on text, and I'm going to change the size. Font size, click, and tells me that it wants to put it in at medium, but my copyright, I don't need it to be that big. So I'm going to pick the EM setting, and I'm going to change that from 0 to maybe 0.75, so it's 75% of what it would look like if I didn't change the size. Also, both of these, I really don't want them to be Times New Roman. That's the default font. So I'll go back to the top one, the road less taken, which I know is the page header H1. Make sure that I select it in my selectors. Go to my text properties and change the font family to something else. Go back to font family. And I want to take it to Gotham. And that'll change it to Gotham, and I'll do the same thing for the bottom. I'll click on my my footer, which, by the way, if I click on P down here, it'll just select everything. I still have to come to the selectors on the side, make sure that I'm on page footer P, and then change the text family, or rather the font family, to something that I want to use. This will also be the Gotham. So it's a little smaller, but it is Gotham nonetheless. While I'm doing this, I might as well start to think about saving what I'm doing. So I'll click on the file management icon and put my file. This is where it becomes important that not only do you save your file, but that you include dependent files to transfer onto the server. I'll say yes, so that then the styles.css will accompany everything else that's going up there. The file styles.css has been modified. I will click yes to all, and now both of them are gone. This way I can go into my browser and go to my page, which is frodriguez.weareidt.com. I still don't have a link from week 4, or rather from the index to week 4, but I know that I created a folder called week 4, and I'll just type in atop week 4, and then it'll show me that there's the road not taken. My Gotham is loaded in both the heading and the header and the footer. Everything else is centered along the page. So this is the very basic setup for layout. Make sure that all is saved and then you can see this when you publish it. And next we're going to publish a poem and add some hyperlinks so that we can make our hyper poem.